Hello and welcome to Atop the Fourth Wall, where bad comics burn. Patreon-sponsored review time again, and while we have come to expect Patreon-sponsored reviews to break from bad comics, even I've got to say that this was an unexpected thing to have me cover. A David Cronenberg movie. We don't judge what people choose. Some people just want to see a piece of media through a lens of a critic who wouldn't normally touch it. See what sort of jokes and analysis can be made from that perspective. Maybe it's an underappreciated work that doesn't get as much attention and they want to give it its due. The patron recognized that with it being a Cronenberg movie, it might not exactly be safe for YouTube, and they told me that I could review 5 episodes of Beyblade if I so choose instead. Honestly, the only reason I'm not taking them up on it is because I fear Japanese copyright detection for anything. If you're unfamiliar with Cronenberg's body of work, well, body is the appropriate word here, because he's known for body horror. The remake of The Fly, Crimes of the Future, Videodrome, The Brood, etc. Not all of his work delves into this, but Cronenberg's reputation is for flesh to be as gooey and melty and misshapen as possible. Usually while also engaged in weird, freaky sex of some kind. Because hey, let's face it, sex is also gooey and at times misshapen and features weird things being done to flesh as well. Boy, is this episode gonna get demonetized! Cronenberg also has this weird tendency to cameo in the most unlikely places. He played a government agent in Jason X of all movies, and had a recurring role in Star Trek Discovery. I stopped watching Discovery after season 3 for various reasons, but I do have to tell you I loved his scene where he rendered Michelle Yeoh's character speechless. Mainly because I hated her character, but still the fact that it's David Cronenberg opposite Michelle friggin' Yeoh in a Star Trek show continues to blow my mind. I feel like it's best if we just jump into this one with as little backstory on the film itself as possible. So let's dig into the 1999 David Cronenberg movie eXistenZ. With capital X and Z at the end, because poor literacy is cool.
Welcome to Atop the Fourth Wall, where bad comics burn. Linkara's gonna teach you all a lesson you won't learn. What's with these awkward subjects? What's all this art so rubbish? To anyone who's had a bad comic published, it could be your turn. Linkara, he is a man, punch, sporadically a grouch. Linkara, he has his own spaceship, but he's always on his couch. Linkara, ghosts, gods, a universe in flux. Linkara, this comic sucks. Linkara.
Natural nylon, sourced only from replanted artificial polymers. After the opening credits, we open with Christopher Eccleston.
eXistenZ.
Ask your doctor if it's right for you. Oh look, here I am. And poor British Christopher Eccleston is trying to pretend he has a Brooklyn accent and he is not pulling it off.
We encourage consumer loyalty and we want you to help us with our product testing.
And to be fair, it's not like I, as an untrained Minnesotan, is able to pull off a British accent either, but it's just an odd choice is all. Eccleston is a representative of a company called Antenna Research, which is giving a seminar about their new product with the goofy name. However, he's not actually giving the seminar. His job is to write the name of the product on a chalkboard, even though it's already on a banner behind him, and instead introduce the actual person behind this.
The world's greatest game designer is here in person to lead you, our first test enclave.
Unfortunately, it turns out he's talking about David Cage, and everybody collectively groans. Actually, this person, the GamePod goddess as she's known, is Allegra Geller, who explains that the world of games is in a kind of trance where people accept so little.
But the possibilities are so great.
Think of how many more microtransactions we can add. Base price $70? Try base price $150. Live service models for all.
eXistenZ is not just a game. It's an entirely new game system.
And to prove how serious we are about this, my partner in this endeavor, Tommy Tellerico. I love how the announcement of this new game and console is taking place in, like, a small college lecture hall and not a big industry event without any press coverage. I'm not gonna be too harsh on this point. This movie came out in 1999. The games industry was certainly growing, but it wasn't quite as mainstream the same way it is nowadays. Individual franchises certainly were, but frequently Hollywood's understanding of video games was still stuck in the 80s. And if it wasn't, it was stuck in the ridiculous. Thus, the idea of introducing something like this to like 30 people at some seminar instead of a big trade show or even an official product testing center just isn't something that they were considering at the time.
We have 12 prototype MetaFlesh game pods.
And you'll all be fighting to the death to figure out who gets them. I should note at this point that this movie takes place in the year 2030, so when a latecomer to the seminar, Noel Dichter, comes in, the security guard, Ted Pikel, played by Jude Law, scans his futuristic ID card as well as his body for recording devices. We see the game pods, and they're flesh-colored devices with little knobs on them that you operate by rubbing and poking. There's even a curved indentation with a nubbin in the center you stroke with your finger, and the connecting tables are smooth, twisting cords.
Message, Spock?
None that I'm conscious of.
Honestly, the grossest part of these things is that it makes weird cries and squelching noises while also undulating. I love how even Christopher Eccleston looks grossed out by these sex toys vaguely shaped like Xbox controllers, and he works for the company. Ted asks Eccleston, in case you're wondering, he's not named in the film, hence why I'm calling him by his real name, about how Allegra seems shy.
She spends most of her time alone in a room designing her games. I think she'd like it best if she never had to show them to anybody.
She likes making visual novels about romancing and having sex with Godzilla. She's embarrassed about them, but they're honestly one of the most popular things she produces. It turns out Noel actually brought a weird organic gun hidden inside one of his own gross earlier models of GamePod and easily walks up to the stage and shoots Allegra with it, yelling, "Death to the demoness Allegra Geller," while nobody reacts until he actually opens fire. Then again, this is probably the most interesting thing to happen at this seminar, since it consists of watching 12 people sit on stage silently while Allegra pokes at her controller. I'm just saying, there used to be confusion about the concept of Let's Plays, the criticism being, why would you watch somebody else play the game instead of playing it yourself? But like, at least this wasn't just watching their hands pushing buttons. What was the audience supposed to get out of this? Eccleston also gets shot before some other security guards take out Noel with real guns. However, as Eccleston dies, he tells Ted to get Allegra out of there, that the company has enemies in-house that want her gone too, and to trust no one. Ugh, put that gun back in the oven. I don't think it's quite done cooking yet. Somehow, Ted manages to get Allegra out of there while the other people with guns do nothing to stop them. I don't know, they put some more bullets into Noel's body, so maybe they're still aiming at him. Also, just walk off that gunshot, Allegra, it's fine. And indeed, it's apparently fine. In the next scene, they're driving around and she kind of feels at the gunshot wound, but otherwise she has no reaction whatsoever. Does that mean that if they go back, then Christopher Eccleston didn't regenerate into David Tennant? Ted gets a call on his phone, which in this reality looks like a big lump of silly putty that glows. Great, so texting is even more difficult if you've got big hands. Bring back slide-out keyboards, phone manufacturers! It did predict one thing, though, as Allegra grabs it and tosses it out a window, pointing out that a phone is a great big tracking device, and if there are people after her, it's best not to loudly announce their location. Ted also reveals that he's not actually security. He's a marketing trainee. Then why the hell was he acting as security and scanning for recording devices instead of one of the actual security guards with guns? She says they need to stop.
Why?
So we can have an intimate moment together.
I need your help to defeat this boss on my game pod. Actually, it's to extract the bullet from her shoulder with a pocket knife. But it turns out it's not a bullet. To their confusion, it's a tooth. Oh my god, the tooth fairy's gone berserk! And indeed, the weird gun has a magazine full of human teeth. Which is really freaking weird, considering a tooth would most likely shatter if fired out of a gun. And even then, the density isn't really enough to pierce flesh. You'd probably do more damage if you took the tooth and tried to poke her in the eyes with it. Ted says that a gun made like that could get past any detector system, but just even if we take the movie about the deadly teeth weapon at face value, I still feel like plastic would work better. They stop at a motel where Allegra can practice for the big Flesh Night tournament coming up, and Ted can eat some takeout food that I guess they ordered in. Allegra says that she enjoys eXistenZ, but that when there are two players, one is just a tourist. Which makes me wonder what the hell they were doing with 12 people on stage. Were they all in spectator mode? Like, they figured out online multiplayer by the mid-80s. There were Doom death matches in 1994. This is what I mean about Hollywood's understanding of video games taking a while to develop. Allegra realizes that Ted doesn't have a bioport that would allow him to play any of her games, which I guess you stick the umbilical cord of the game pod into? Ugh.
You've never played any game.
That's not true! I had the best game console!
Over 200 games can be yours with Pro 200, the greatest bargain in computer game history. The Pro 200 is also a full-function calculator and is not available in stores.
Does eXistenZ have a built-in calculator? Yeah, I didn't think so. Ted explains that he'd like to play her games, but has a phobia of the surgery necessary to install a bioport. Allegra says it's more like the equivalent of getting your ears pierced, just kind of shooting a little device into your spine, but Ted points out that there's a tiny chance of spinal damage from it.
Besides, once you're ported, there's no end to the games you can play.
I mean, until the company shuts down the servers anyway. Apropos of nothing, have you heard of Ross Scott's campaign to get video game companies to stop doing that and other anti-consumer BS? Hope it's successful, otherwise my mentioning it will become horribly dated and depressing. Allegra says that her game pod was damaged during everything that went down, describing the thing as if it's alive, which I guess it probably is, but with the organicness and all, it's just that hasn't really been properly established yet. This is one of those kinds of movies that throws you into its universe head first and expects you to roll with it. I actually got the 2030 year from the Wikipedia page. And I get it. We can infer and follow the story without being spoon-fed everything. But at the same time, it's a freaky-deaky world with tooth guns and bioports. A little exposition crawl at the beginning saying that we have living biomechanical video game consoles in the year 2030 isn't too much to ask for, I think. She says the thing's, well, software, for lack of a better term here, could have been corrupted because it was in the process of sending the eXistenZ architecture into the other pods when it was interrupted, and she needs to play the game in order to find out if the thing is okay. However, she needs someone else in there with her because of reasons, and Ted agrees to it, though that means they need to install an illegal, unregistered bioport in him in the middle of the night, which involves going to a gas station. Conveniently, Willem Dafoe is the gas station attendant named Gas. That's not a joke. You know, I'm something of a gas myself. Gas recognizes Allegra, saying she changed his life and agrees to install it in Ted. Ted later asks him how she changed his life.
I operated a gas station.
You still operate a gas station, don't you?
Nah, I'm an assistant manager now. Video game addiction made me get demoted, which allowed me more time to game. Win-win! He means it altered his perspective on his life and understanding, citing in particular Allegra's game, Art God.
Thou, the player of the game, art God. Very spiritual.
Dude, I played Populous too. You don't see me falling to the feet of Peter Molyneux. Meanwhile, I guess Allegra's trying to mind meld with the wall here? Yeah, it's been a minor thing so far. The movie will just randomly cut to a shot of an object nearby or their hands touching something. It's not bad, but it implies a deeper meaning behind the action or hinting at something we should be seeing, but I'm, well, not seeing it. Allegra is just acting kind of weird, brushing her hand across random objects as if she was trying to feel different sensations, and then encounters a weird little two-headed creature, which leads to nothing? Anyway, the port is installed, which causes temporary paralysis of Ted's legs. While Gas washes up, Allegra lubes up the hole on his backside before shoving the fleshy tube inside of him.
Are you sure it isn't time for a colorful metaphor?
However, something goes wrong and it zaps the pod. She claims that he panicked and then fried it, but he denies that. Or, just gonna throw this out there, maybe his method of accessing the game was installed by the Green Goblin in the back of a dingy gas station. The problem is that according to her, her pod contains the only copy of eXistenZ and they can't access it now. Well then you're a terrible programmer if you didn't keep backups of this stuff. Look, I get it. I've lost project files and work before, even on this show, but usually there was at least an earlier save to go to. You didn't think that maybe your $30 million video game should have a copy or two on whatever GUI equivalent of desktop PCs are in this world? However, turns out I was right. Gas pulls out a shotgun. I'd say that means it has an actual chance of killing her, but for all we know, it shoots spleens or something. And reveals that he deliberately installed a bad port to fry the game, since word has gone out across the countryside of a $5 million reward for killing Allegra and a bonus for stopping her new game. Ted manages to take him down with the bioport nail gun installer thingy.
Oh God, I think he's dead.
It's okay, Ted. I can see his parachute. As we continue our road trip movie already in progress, Ted points out that they really need to find some help after Allegra was almost killed twice now. Allegra, however, is more concerned with repairing her pod. As such, they arrive at a new destination the next day.
We're going skiing?
Hey, you two have had a rough day or two. I think a vacation is in order. Ted even spots the two-headed creature, which I guess came with them, and Allegra says it's a mutated amphibian of some kind.
5 out of times.
These days, you can't tell if it's CGI or a stop-motion puppet. Apparently the ski lodge is a safe place because nobody physically skis anymore. Then why is there a big building advertising it? But she's right, it's actually some kind of workshop run by her old friend Kiri Vineker, played by Ian Holm.
I will contact Antenna right away and have them send some people over to come collect you.
No.
Between Christopher Eccleston, Jude Law, and Ian Holm, what is this movie's hatred of British accents? Vineker and his assistant perform surgery on the game pod, explaining to Ted how the thing is essentially an animal, grown from amphibious cells and injected with synthetic DNA.
Of course! Don't you know anything about science?
I should also note that I'm not going to show you any of this bit because it's already going to be tough enough to keep this episode from being demonetized.
Well, where do the batteries go?
Cute joke, but you already live in this world of bioports, flesh phones, and organic technology like this, and it's seen as perfectly normal for you. So why are you making a remark like that now, as if this is a weird novelty? The pod, according to Allegra, gets its power from the person it's plugged into. Thus, if you're tired and worn out, it won't function properly. Wow, so you can't even use this thing to relax and unwind after a long day at work. The selling points on this thing are phenomenal! After they finish the repairs in the pod, Vineker says they'll take out the bad bioport and install a fresh one. Allegra examines the hole after it's done.
I know writers who use subtext, and they're all cowards.
She plugs in the cord. This is one of those movies where I feel like I need to put censor bars over everything, and yet for the most part, it hasn't really been explicit. It's all implication. The weird flesh shapes that resemble human anatomy. The sex imagery without actually being sex. The surgery has been the only part where we see, like, explicitly not safe for work stuff, and even then it's a surgery on a prop. And not even a representation of a real animal. It's like if you filled a PlayStation with fake blood and spirit Halloween organs and bones. I have to applaud Cronenberg on making this whole thing uncomfortable and gross, even though he has had much worse and more explicit body horror before. If anything, the fact that it's so not explicit is what makes it more uncomfortable. Our imagination is doing the heavy lifting and moving the gears around, and the people in the movie are refusing to acknowledge how kind of disgusting or sexual this all is. So after 40 minutes, it's time to finally see what the hell is so cool about this multi-million-dollar video game. And they're in, like, a game-crazy store as themselves.
That was crunk.
It's just like a fully immersive virtual reality thing that's plugged into your nervous system. And the virtual reality setting is just a video game store. You know, I can't say that there isn't a market for games of real-life stuff. Farm sims, power wash simulator, visual novels for high school romances, all that jazz. But at the same time, if I'm gonna have to shove a flesh tube into my back and play this and have full emotional and physical feedback, I feel like it should be a scenario that I can't experience by driving 10 minutes from my house. Full Moon Entertainment released a movie in 1993 called Arcade that also featured a virtual reality video game, but in it there was like, you know, a video game, dodging hazards, fighting bosses and getting keys, that kind of thing. It's not a very good movie, yet it feels more realistic than this. About accurate graphics for video games at the time, too. But hey, maybe I'm being too harsh on this. What is the actual point of this game?
You have to play the game to find out why you're playing the game.
Oh god, you're one of those developers who's all make your own fun instead of actually having content in your game, aren't you?
It's the future, Michael. You'll see how natural it feels.
The future is dumb. They find a mini-pod, which I guess is like the Game Boy version of this thing. I don't know. Allegra seems to imply that she doesn't know what's in here, even though she programmed the game! Unless it's like procedurally generated products in this place. But that seems weird that she didn't consider this possible combination of a tiny game pod. Anyway, they meet the owner of the store, who says he has what they're looking for, and in the back asks who sent them. Ted angrily yells that it doesn't matter who sent them, but they're here. Then realizes that he didn't mean to say that and doesn't know why he did. She explains that it's his character who said that. that while he has control over most of the dialogue, some things need to be said in order to advance the plot and establish the characters. Though if they have dialogue options and control, isn't this supposed to be a role-playing game and there are other ways of doing that? I'm just saying, if you want to see true development and freedom, watch Team 4 Star's playthrough of Fallout 4, where the character's quest to find his son and avenge his wife turns him into a cannibalistic barbarian by the end, mostly because he was promised a kickball that he never received. This movie half understands game mechanics. They point out that the store owner has now gone into a loop waiting for him to be addressed since, well, he's an NPC and all. But then again, that also makes me wonder what makes this such a better experience for playing a game if it's no different than operating it with a controller. If it was somehow multi-adaptive, able to hold conversations outside of pre-programmed ones, then sure, the immersive quality of plugging your brain into it has some value. But if it's just the equivalent of popping in Pokemon Blue and talking to the guy who tells you science is amazing over and over, what's the point? Anyway, I find it amusing that the mini-pods are on, like, a bubble and card like an action figure instead of its own box. I mean, the owner said that these things were delicate, but I feel like some Tamagotchis had better protective packaging than these. He asks to confirm that they both have industry-standard bioports, which Allegra confirms.
We do, don't we?
Did you make this game or not? The owner leaves, and Allegra says she's disappointed by the guy's design, accent, and dialogue. Did you make this game or not? The things are so small that they just plug directly into their bioports, so apply the chapstick lube and shove it in there. Anyway, back to being gross as Ted's in-game character licks her bioport and then they start making out. He grows worried about his real body, but she just says if there's a problem, he'll pop right back into reality. And then suddenly Ted is in some kind of weird meat-packing plant with frogs on a conveyor belt. It's really sad when the sci-fi sitcom Red Dwarf's virtual reality game makes more sense and is better designed than this one. I'm just saying, would you rather be the Riviera Kid who can shoot bullets out of midair, or a guy who shoves a fleshy Game Boy up your back hole so the character you're playing can pretend to be cutting open frogs? The place is actually apparently a game pod farm. The NPC next to him, who is a Canadian actor putting on a Russian accent for some reason, recommends he go to lunch at a Chinese restaurant nearby and to ask for the special. He meets with Allegra, who seems to be acting like an NPC, for no real reason, and they head to the Chinese restaurant, helpfully named Chinese Restaurant.
Yeah, they hired a huge consulting firm for millions of bucks, and this is the name they came up with.
After ordering the special, everyone else at the table leaves. Ted wants to pause the game for a sec.
Why? What's wrong? I mean, aren't you dying to see what's so special about the special?
You know, Half-Life came out a year before this movie, and even with the mundane intro sequence before the resonance cascade, by this point Gordon Freeman had at least crowbarred a few head crabs. This video game is like, hey, go into this game within a game and ask for some food that nobody else wants. Ted's feeling disconnected from his real life and experience, but Allegra thinks this is great, that he's fully integrating with the game architecture.
eXistenZ is paused!
And in one moment, Ted suddenly becomes the most relatable character. They're out for a bit. Or are they? Ted points out that the real world feels the same as the game world now and is uncertain of their own reality. They go back in and the special is served, a cooked version of the weird two-headed mutant amphibian they encountered. Ted doesn't want to eat it, but his character is compelled to do so. Let's see, I could play Baldur's Gate 3 with a mouse and keyboard, or I could shove a fleshy tube into my spine and be forced to eat something repulsive that I hate. Truly, Allegra is the greatest game dev of all time. Also, she didn't know that this would happen. Did she make this game or not? The bones and other inedible components of the animal get snapped together into the weird teeth-shooting gun. Oh, that's why this is the special. You get a free toy inside. This is the real reason why Kinder Eggs are banned in America. He aims the gun at her, but it's unclear if this is him joking or the game compelling him to do so. He does say that he feels the need to shoot their waiter.
Well, that makes sense.
Why? Are your characters mad about the need to tip servers and you're taking it out on him as if it's his fault? She tells him not to resist the urge to shoot him, but Ted is naturally uncomfortable because of how real everything feels. She says he'll have to anyway, and to just enjoy the ride. He says that free will clearly doesn't factor into her world.
It's like real life. There's just enough to make it interesting.
No, interesting is when you're playing a stealth game and you elect to just go on an open killing spree while screaming, "Stop being infected!" Everything is fine. Stop being infected! Your version is just, I don't care if it's not something you want to do, just do it, idiot. Which is not compelling or interesting, especially in this context, when we have absolutely no idea what's going on in the game's story. Seriously, are we sure that this thing isn't just a tech demo? This groundbreaking new game consists of going into a virtual video game store and playing another game, neither of which is an actual plot or reason for why things are happening. Putting that aside, on average, it's been shown that most people don't like being just complete monsters in games, and generally, if there's a moral choice, they will tend to go for the good option. If you're on rails, at least there's a story reason why things progress the way they do. Last year, I played Red Dead Redemption 2 on stream. While certain plot points are just unavoidable, you understood why things were going the way they were. The narrative went a certain way because of forces outside the player's control. Plus, it was a prequel, so it needed to head in a certain direction by the end. But eXistenZ has told us nothing about what is the game, because after all, you only know why by playing it, but we don't! Her general confusion about plot developments leads me to believe that indeed, the entire game's plot is just procedurally generated! This is an AI script that's just shoving in random things to have happen and hope there's a point at the end! Anyway, despite saying he won't do it, he then shoots the waiter, getting the attention of everyone in the restaurant.
Just, a little misunderstanding over the check. Pay no attention and enjoy your meal.
Well, how can they when you killed this place's only waiter? Most of these people haven't gotten their food yet. Ted's co-worker from the farm, who apparently also works at the restaurant, or maybe they just reused his character model to save time, says that the two have passed the test and that the waiter betrayed all of them. Outside, he shows them where they farm the animals to make game pods, where they learned that the animals could also be harvested for food and weapons. They're owned by Cortical Systematics, the company that made the mini game pods from before. I should note that, like the 2030 date designation, Wikipedia says that Cortical Systematics is actually a rival real-world company to Antenna Research, a fact not mentioned so far in the movie itself, which has only brought them up as if they're a fictional company in the eXistenZ game. Speaking of, the guy says they've proven themselves to be true realists, which, again, according to Wikipedia, is the terrorist group that tried to assassinate Allegra. The realists want to stop both companies from deforming reality, whatever the hell that means, because virtual reality isn't real reality! Between this and comic books in the 90s, did nobody actually know what the word virtual meant? Because they always treat virtual reality as if it's just like another dimension or something. But the word virtual, as in not real, feels like it should be a tip-off about what it means. Anyway, that information, again, is not in the movie. They go back to the game store where an employee says the Chinese waiter was actually supposed to be their realist contact, while the farm employee was a double agent for Cortical Systematics. And apparently this confusion about all this is by design, because when they go back into the game pod farm, Ted rants to Allegra about all the same things I am.
I don't know what's going on. We're both stumbling around together in this unformed world whose rules and objectives are largely unknown.
Is this the human condition of madness, leader? It is.
Oh, and here's the best part. Allegra says that sounds like the game she made.
It sounds like a game. It's not going to be easy to market.
Yeah, you say that, but then Death Stranding was a success, and you try to explain that game in a 30-second commercial.
But it's a game everybody's already playing.
Well, then why would they want to play yours? They're back in there to find something that the employee sent them in to get to stop the double agent. His name is Nourish. I didn't think he was important enough to name until now. They find a diseased game pod, and Allegra's like, oh hell yeah, let's plug into this thing. That seems like a great idea. Apparently the plan is to spread the disease to her and consequently to all the other game pods in the factory. But it goes wrong and he has to cut her free. Apparently you exchange fluids with this thing because cutting it causes Allegra to start bleeding to death. So then Nourish comes in with a really crappy flamethrower, waves it against the diseased pod, and it releases spores that infect all the other pods. Allegra stabs him, and the two suddenly find themselves back in the ski lodge. This game is still gonna get, like, perfect scores on Metacritic, isn't it? Somehow, the disease from the game spreads to the real eXistenZ game pod, which, of course, Ted points out should be impossible, since you know, it's not real. They soon realize what the problem is. The new bioport in Ted was actually infected with something that spread to the game pod. The scenario in the game was the game pod trying to warn them about the disease, Until the window explodes inwards and the employee from the game store shows up in military gear, saying the revolution has begun. Ted thinks that they're still in the game, and that guy gets shot by Vinegar before he can shoot Allegra. Vinegar claims to work for Cortical Systematics and wants her to join them, that he made a copy of eXistenZ while doing surgery on the game pod. She shoots him, believing him to be a game character, but then Ted says that maybe they're still in the real world, but also reveals that he was the true realist assassin this whole time. But then she says she knew he was when he pointed the gun at her in the restaurant, and the disinfectant thing she put into his bioport was actually a bomb, and she blows it up and—
What the hell is going on?
Allegra, Ted, and pretty much every other person we've seen in this movie so far wakes up in the seminar room. None of that was real. Not even Allegra's seminar.
You know, my accent in the game was so thick I could hardly understand myself.
Yeah, seems like an unnecessary bit of game design that can really be frustrating both for players and for anyone else observing it. Yeah, the whole thing was just a test session for this VR game called eXistenZ, with considerably less fleshy game systems. Some of the people complaining that their initial characters didn't have much to do after their first scenes and got knocked out, but congratulate Ted and Allegra for getting so far. The actual game designer, Nourish, comments privately that he doesn't like that the game that was generated took on an anti-game stance, including that it started with an assassination attempt on a game designer. They wonder if the idea came from one of the players.
Let's probe it when we do the focus group.
How is this not the focus group? But no, it turns out that Allegra and Ted are indeed realists and pull out guns to assassinate Nourish and his assistant to punish them for deforming reality. Which again, whatever the hell that means for something that isn't real. And so our movie ends with them about to shoot the guy who played the waiter, who asks if they're still in the game, and the two don't answer. I feel like I'm gonna get some pushback on this, and if you love this movie, more power to you. But quite frankly, I think this movie sucks. I will give the movie this. The ending twist that all the bad accents were on purpose as a sign of the unreality of the plot was actually very clever. But then that also kind of invites the question of why the game designer chose to have those in them. But apparently he didn't because, like the game eXistenZ, eXistenZ is a procedurally generated plot. And hey, it's clever that the confusing, weird, nonsensical nature of the game was itself an indication of it being fake. But that still leaves us with the fact that the story is a weird, confusing waste of time. It was all a dream kind of endings can work, but you need to make the journey and payoff of that worth it. And it was not worth it. The big twist of it all being a game all the people in it were playing already was kind of predictable because you kind of expect that when you're dealing with something with multiple layers of reality. Admittedly, I thought we'd learned that everything since the start with the assassination attempt wasn't real, so good job fooling me there, but then that makes what we did experience really pointless. We just kind of wander around with pretty bland, empty dialogue that doesn't explain the world they're in, a fake world at that, except maybe some parts of it are real given the realist assassin thing, except, ooh, maybe they're still in the game. And I'm left wondering what we're supposed to take away from this. Sure, maybe the classic warning of how do you know what's reality when everything inside feels so real, but I didn't find any of the worlds they were inhabiting very compelling or interesting. Just kind of disjointed and black because of the organic technology, which is apparently not even real either because the VR tech being used looked like regular technology instead. And hey, questioning whether something is real is a time-honored sci-fi trope, but the problem is that I've seen plenty of other media, even episodes of comedic TV shows, pull off this premise a lot better than it is here. It feels like there's a good theme or message by the end of those stories, character development, or at least an interesting ride that makes you feel good even if none of it was real. But this, I got nothing out of it other than being squicked out by the organic tech that didn't even matter anyway. The multiple layers of reality feel tacked on and somehow they interact with each other, except then they say they can't, but why or how do they? Ignoring everything being a game, why did what happened in the mini-pod game affect the first layer of game in the store so that there were factions fighting each other, but nobody cares in any version of this when a bunch of people are shot? No exposition is given about the realists or why the companies are so bad or why anyone would want to kill someone over video games like this or if the rival companies are real or if, God! I feel like this movie is clever in a lot of ways, but that it thinks it's cleverer than it actually is. I don't know, maybe I'm not smart enough for this movie. I'm not into surrealism and abstract art, and maybe this is actually a masterpiece of reality bending, and it's just not clicking for me like it is for some people out there. But I just feel empty after finishing it, and I don't know what I'm supposed to understand other than, well, that was an hour and a half I'm not getting back. Next time, I am indeed restructuring the schedule a bit. Like I said last time, nothing canceled, but I am proceeding with the Patreon-sponsored reviews that were supposed to happen at least. Next up, we return to the manga that's been made into an incredibly popular anime, Delicious in Dungeon.
You have to play the game to find out why you're playing the game.
You're kind of an idiot, aren't you?
Hello, my friends. Please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell for notifications on new video releases. If you'd like to support future videos, you can check out my Patreon, buy merch from the store, NV link in the description, or check out the t-shirts available from Teespring. Thanks for watching.